All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's live cooking demonstration. My name is Ryan Smith. I'm the Wellness Program Administrator here at Georgia State University's Employee Development and Wellness Services. Before we get started, I do want to cover just a couple quick things about the platform. We're using WebEx today, and we are going to be recording today's session. So you can view it again at a later time and cook alongside me, or share it with a colleague who may not have been able to attend today. We do upload copies of most of our events to our EDWS YouTube page, where you can find past cooking demonstrations, stretch breaks, yoga, guided meditation, and more. So we encourage you to check that out, and we'll be sure to share that info with you in some follow-up communications. Throughout today's presentation, if you've got questions, comments, anything like that, please make use of the WebEx chat box feature that should be located on the right side of your screen. At the end of the presentation, I'll be sure to address any of those questions and comments that may pop up. Additionally, I'm joined today by my colleague, Cheryl Johnson-Ransaw. She's online to provide technical support, so if you experience any audio or visual issues during the presentation, please make sure to send a message to all panelists, and Cheryl will be able to help you troubleshoot any of those problems that may arise. With that being said, we will go ahead and get started. So today we are going to be making vegetarian tostadas. This is a very, very simple recipe. It's great for if you need a quick lunch or even a quick dinner. It takes about 15 minutes to make total. So you'll see us fly through this, and the recipe scales very well too. I'm going to be making a smaller portion today that will use 5 tortillas and make about 5 tostadas. I typically find that I eat about 2 of them in a sitting. That feels like the right amount for me, but your mileage may vary. But we'll talk about the nutrition information and how you can adjust the recipe to make the amount that you want. In terms of equipment, we're going to be using a cutting board, a knife, a couple mixing bowls, and then we're going to use an oven on the broil setting. So when we broil things, we're getting a really intense heat from the top of the oven that will help give us like a crispy browning to it very quickly. If you don't have an oven or you don't want to use an oven and you've maybe got like a toaster oven or a small appliance like that, that will work just as well. You'll have to cook in smaller batches, of course, but you can make use of that to still produce this recipe. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're actually using a baking sheet. We're going to line it with foil. And like I said, I'm going to be making 5 tostadas today, but you can scale this to however many you want. And all the ingredients I'm using today are going to be designed around this 5 tostada amount. So I've got the oven set to broil on high, and the rack is just in the middle. And we're going to set these in there and let them warm up for about 2 minutes. Now keep a close eye on these because these tortillas are already baked. They're very thin and they can burn fast. So only about 2 minutes. If you start seeing them starting to turn brown, go ahead and pull them out. So we'll set these in there. Okay, so while that's happening, let's talk through some of our other ingredients that we're going to be using, and I'm going to keep an eye on the clock here. We're going to be making use of refried beans and black beans today. These are both very, very healthy options. They are plant-based sources of protein. They've got a lot of fiber in them, so they're going to bring a lot of nutritional value to this recipe. Now, for the 5 tostadas I'm making, I'm using half of a can of black beans and half of a can of refried beans. So of course, if you wanted to make a larger amount, like 10 tostadas, you could just use the full can of each. But for this recipe, half of a can of each. If you want to keep this recipe vegetarian, do look for the vegetarian refried beans. You can find traditional refried beans, which usually use lard or animal fat in them, whereas the vegetarian kind will use a plant-based oil like soybean oil. So if you care about that, keep an eye out for that. You can see this is just a vegetarian can here. So we've got half the cans situated there. What we're going to do is we're going to take just a medium-sized mixing bowl, and I'm going to move the refried beans over into this bowl. And we're just going to combine them with a little bit of seasoning to give them some more flavor. Refried beans on their own have salt in them, and they taste all right. They're pretty good, but we can definitely enhance that by putting in some seasoning of our own and really bringing out some more exciting flavors. So 2 minutes does go by very quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and remove those tortillas now. They're not going to be fully brown, but we're going to put them back in just a moment. So that's okay. And what you'll notice is the tortillas will start to curl up a little bit as they bake. They will be a little bit firmer. They'll start to get crispy. And like I said, the reason we're going to go ahead and pull them out now is we're going to put some of these ingredients on top of there and then set it back in to properly finish heating. If you don't keep an eye on them, they will burn. In fact, when I did the test batch earlier this week for this recipe, I had a couple of them get a little darker than I wanted on the edges just because of how fast they'll broil and how thin they are. So keep a close eye. Your oven may be at a slightly different temperature than mine. So when you see them start to curl a little bit, or if you see any browning, go ahead and pop them out for that first round of heating. So we've got our half a can of the refried beans in there. And we're going to keep it very simple with the seasoning. We're going to use 1/8 of a teaspoon of ground cumin, 1/8 of a teaspoon of garlic powder, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of chili powder. Now, chili powder gives a very, very small amount of heat, especially at this quantity. So don't be worried about it if you're not a fan of spicy foods. You will not really have any kick or anything from just chili powder. It's not that spicy. So we're just going to mix this around. Distribute the seasoning throughout the refried beans there so that they have a little bit more flavor in every bite. And you'll notice we're not adding any salt because there's already sodium in the refried beans and the canned black beans. In fact, if you can, I would recommend looking for a lower sodium variety of both of those to keep them heart healthier. I know the black beans I got from Kroger are reduced sodium. So we're not adding any salt because there's already plenty of salt present in those canned foods. So we've got the beans there. I'm going to temporarily shift the cutting board to the side, and I'm going to put my oven mitt back on because I know the pan is definitely still hot. And we're just going to situate that here. And what we're going to do is just divide this bean mixture up. We're just sort of putting a little layer of the refried beans on each tostada. And if you want, it's almost like if you ever made a pizza before, kind of spreading the marinara sauce around. That's what we're doing basically, but with refried beans, just putting a base on there. So I usually just do a dollop of the beans and then use the backside of the spoon to spread it around evenly. Now, if you want to get particular, you can measure out the exact amount of beans that you're putting on each tortilla, but there's really no need to do that. I just eyeball it and try to spread them out evenly. Now, we're using just regular corn tortillas. They are very low in calories. They're only about 50 calories a piece, which helps keep the overall calories of this recipe on the lower side. The tortillas are a source of carbohydrates, but we're also getting healthier carbohydrates from things like the beans that we're using. So we don't need that many tortillas or that big of a tortilla for this type of recipe. And I like the small ones because it lets you make a very reasonable sized tostada, and then you can always have an additional if you want, rather than having to serve a really large one and feeling like you have to eat the whole thing. So we've got the refried beans on there. Now taking your half a can of the black beans, we'll just distribute those out. Now, at this point, after we do the beans, you are going to have a choice, and that is going to be when you want to add the cheese to this recipe. I am making it with a little bit of cheese. If you want to keep this recipe completely vegan, you can leave the cheese out if you want, but I'm just going to have it be vegetarian today, so I am going to use some cheese. I love that flavor and the texture that it adds. So you can either save the cheese for the end and sprinkle it on top as sort of a cooler ingredient, or you can sprinkle it on before this step if you want it to melt into the beans. I'm going to opt to melt it into the beans, and I'm using, this is just a 1/4 cup of a Mexican cheese blend. So a couple different cheese types, and just a 1/4 cup. We're not trying to make a really, really super cheesy dish here. We're trying to focus on some of the other flavors, keep that sodium low, but just enjoy a little bit of cheese to enhance the taste of the recipe. So we'll sprinkle that around. Now what we'll do, the oven is still on that high broil. We're going to set it back in for 2 to 3 minutes. Once again, watch very carefully. The first thing that will start to brown will be the outer rim of those tortillas. So if you see those corn tortillas starting to brown really dark on the end, or even just starting to go slightly, it's probably time to pull them out. Because if you wait for the middle of it to get really crispy, those edges are probably going to burn a bit. So we'll set these in for 2 to 3 minutes. And I'm just going to set a timer for 2, and then we'll check on it and see how we're doing. In the meantime, we can come back here, and we're going to make very, very simple pico de gallo mix to sprinkle on top now. If you want to save time, you can always use store-bought pico de gallo, but it's pretty easy to make a simple one at home. So I've already gone ahead and cut up white onion. This is just 1/4 cup of white onion. If you've seen my demonstrations before, I always cut it before the demonstration because I tear up so much when I cut white onions. So I always try to do that ahead of time. So what we'll cut here though is we've got the white onion. We are going to use just like a small or medium Roma tomato, and we're just going to dice it up. Now you can use a serrated knife if you prefer. Sometimes I like that for cutting into a tomato because it feels a little more controlled. But what I'm going to do, I've gone ahead and rinsed this. I'm going to cut a small sliver off the bottom of the tomato. And what that does is it gives me a flat surface to work with so that tomato won't roll around as I try to cut into it. Then I'm going to curl my fingertips to protect the edges of them. And then I'm just going to do some slices going through the tomato. Now, there are certainly fancier ways to dice a tomato. If you have really excellent knife skills or you know what you're doing, I encourage you to do that. But I'm just going to keep it really easy today for anyone who may not be super comfortable with it. We'll take these slices. I'm going to take maybe 3 of them here stacked, curling my fingertips again, and I'm just going to cut through them in this direction. And then I'm going to rotate 90 degrees and cut in the other direction. And this is a bit of a messy dice. You know, if you were at an authentic restaurant and they were making you some fresh pico, you'd probably have a finer dice than this, but that's okay for what we're working with today. So we'll continue cutting these slices. And I use tomatoes a lot in these demonstrations. I talk about their health benefits all the time. They are an excellent source of a variety of vitamins and minerals. You got potassium in there, you've got some vitamin C and some vitamin A, and they're also a source of lycopene, which is an antioxidant that has some cancer-fighting properties, which is really great to work into our diet. So let's check on these. All right, they are very close. I'm going to give them like 30 seconds and then pull them out because they'll go from lightly brown to burnt very fast. So we'll continue chopping the last couple pieces of this tomato. So like I was mentioning, lycopene is an antioxidant that has some cancer-fighting properties. So finding foods and working them into your diet has a lot of great health effects and can prevent some other issues from popping up long-term. So we love working these foods in. So you can take your diced tomato, and I'm just going to add it to this bowl with the onion because we're going to mix it around with a couple other ingredients to make our homemade pico de gallo mix. And now let's go ahead and pull these tostadas out. Oh yeah, that's perfect. So you can see that cheese melting on there. I don't know if you can see a little bit on the edge here. We got a pretty dark brown, so that one was starting to burn. These other ones are perfect though. They're lightly toasted on the edge. So it's a very, very fine timeline between them being perfectly browned and then a little burnt. Like I said, keep a close eye on them. If they look like they're almost done, you know, maybe give them 15 to 30 seconds and then I pull them out because they'll burn fast. So we'll cut up the rest of this tomato here just so we're not wasting any of it. And I'm using a Roma tomato, but really it doesn't matter too much. Whatever kind of tomato you might have on hand. I know some people are growing tomatoes and harvesting them around this time of year. So you can make do with anything. And really, pico de gallo, it's pretty flexible. We're using onion, tomato, and I'm going to use a jalapeno today with a little bit of lime juice. But you can mix in cucumber, you can mix in mango, you know, whatever you want to do at home to make it sound tasty to you, I encourage you to do that. We are going to add a little bit of kick here with half of a jalapeno. So what I've done is I just cut one in half. I used one earlier this week for another recipe. And just like the tomato, I like to cut things on a flat plane so that they don't rock around on the cutting board. It makes it safer for you and also a little bit easier to cut. So I'm going to cut the stem off. And then I'm going to cut long vertical strips along the jalapeno. And then rotate it 90 degrees and just run the knife along there to get a similar dice. Now, of course, jalapeno has some heat in it. If you are not a big fan, you can replace this with a lot of other vegetables. I mean, if you want it to be visually similar, you could just use a green bell pepper and chop that up and throw them in there. I mentioned cucumber earlier. You can add fruit, anything that you might find in a salsa that you think you'd enjoy, you can add in there. So we'll put that in, or you could just use a smaller quantity of a jalapeno or a larger quantity if you want it to be spicier. Okay, and then the last thing we're going to do is just a little bit of lime juice. Now, if you've got fresh lime juice, I encourage you to use that, but we're just going to use some of the bottled stuff for simplicity today. So we used a very, very small amount of that, just like a quick squirt. And then we're just going to stir this around so that we can get the onion, tomato, jalapeno, and lime juice evenly distributed in there. And that's really it. That's our pico de gallo. Not that complicated. If you want to buy the store-bought stuff, you can. It's a lot cheaper, I think, to just buy fresh produce. And I personally think it tastes better because it's fresh rather than however long that pico has been sitting in the store for. So we've got that made. And then we are going to chop up one more ingredient. And I'm hoping we have some good luck today. Anytime I work with an avocado on these cooking demonstrations, it's a bit of a toss-up as to whether or not we get lucky with the ripeness. So when you're picking out an avocado, you want it to be firm, but you want it to give a little bit. So when you press on it with your fingers, you should feel your fingers sinking in slightly. If it sinks in a lot and the avocado is very soft, it's past ripe, it's not one you really want to use. It's going to be too mushy inside. If it feels like a rock, it's not ready yet. It's not ripe. So we're finding this sweet spot. I think we'll be okay with this one today, but we will check it out. I did go ahead and rinse the avocado. Even though we don't eat the outside of an avocado like we do with other vegetables, whenever you cut into something, you're pressing the knife into it, and any dirt or bacteria that might be on the outside can go into the edible portion. So always good to give them a quick rinse. And what we do when we cut these is we look for the little stem here, and we're going to cut along that stem line. And you're not going to be able to cut through it because it does have a pit inside of it. So you're going to press until you feel resistance, and that's you touching the pit. So I'll press into it, and you can see I can't go further than that because the pit's there. And then we are going to carefully rotate the avocado. I'm not pressing very hard with the knife, just gently pressing into it. We don't want it to slip or anything. And we're just going to cut a circle around it like so. If you've got a ripe avocado at the end, you should be able to twist it apart like that. I think we're doing okay today. It could be a little bit riper, but you see it pulled apart fairly easily, so we're not in a bad situation. To get the pit out, you can use a spoon, or every once in a while, you can do that with the knife and just stick it in. And if the avocado is ripe, you should be able to twist it out like that. Then we can dispose of that. All right. And then what I'll typically do here, I'll just use our pico de gallo spoon. You can slide the spoon in just under the skin and sort of scoop, we're like excavating the avocado, scoop that out. Okay. And normally for a recipe, you might dice this up, but we're actually going to just end up mashing it. So in a smaller, medium-sized bowl, I'm just going to move that entire piece of the avocado in there and then get out this other half as well. Now, avocados have a great reputation as being a very heart-healthy fat. They are higher in the unsaturated fats and lower in saturated fats. So that is a heart-healthier choice. They've also got some fiber in there, so they're a great way to add some nutrition to a dish. So in your bowl here, you can just use the back of a spoon to mash into it and just sort of press it into, we're not quite making guacamole, but we're doing something similar by just mashing it here and softening it up. The idea is that we can then sort of dollop it on top of the tortillas with our pico de gallo mix. And as I'm doing this, I'm encountering that this avocado is not quite as ripe as I would have hoped for. Normally, if you have a very ripe avocado, you can just press into it with no issue. You can hear that sliding around. It's having a little bit of trouble. So what we're going to do, we're going to pivot. I'm going to pull that out, and I'm just going to dice it up into cubes because I think that's going to work better for the ripeness of this avocado. If you've got something like a food processor, that can also make quick work of this, but we'll just do a dice today, and we'll call that good enough. Okay. So let me move our tostadas back into focus. I'm going to put the oven mitt on. I don't think the pan's too hot by now, but it's always better to play it safe. And now what we'll do is we will just top a little bit of the pico de gallo on top of all these tostadas. So we've got so many different vegetables in this recipe: tomatoes, jalapenos, onions, 2 different types of beans, and then the avocado coming in. So very vibrant in terms of the colors, tons of fiber from this guy, which is very good for us. That keeps our digestive system healthy, can help with blood sugar control, helps you feel satisfied, and it can lower your cholesterol as well. So numerous health benefits to all these veggies. So I'm just spreading this out evenly. If you have a little extra, that's okay too. Now, if you had the mashed avocado, this would be the opportunity to sort of dollop it. I'm just going to grab a couple of these cubes and throw them on there for some extra fats, those heart-healthy fats. Hopefully, they'll still taste good since it is a little underripe, but that's okay. Okay. And so, yeah, I'm not too hot now. Those are our tostadas. Very, very simple. I think this is a pretty kid-friendly recipe too. So if you've got people who are picky eaters, beans and cheese in the tortilla is always something people are pretty open to. You can definitely remix this and make it your own though. You know, if you've got other vegetables you want to work into this, we talked about adding maybe some sweetness or fruit flavors like mango to the pico de gallo, using different vegetables to dice up in there. Different types of beans could work. We used corn tortillas today, but there are other options out there for sure, including just alternatives, or you could use flour tortillas. But I like the size of the corn tortillas. You know, this is a very easy portion size. You can have one, you can have two, you can have three, depending on, you know, how active you are or what your calorie needs might be. In terms of nutrition, each one of these little tostadas is about 220 calories. So very reasonable. About 220 calories and about 9 grams of protein and 8 grams of fiber, which is phenomenal. We're really, really getting a lot of nutrition in here. So at 220 calories, my recommendation for most people to just have like a nice balanced meal would be probably to eat about 2 of them. That would give you 440 calories roughly, about 18 grams of protein, which is excellent, and plenty of fiber. So that's my personal recommendation. But again, you can scale it as needed. Maybe you want to do one and enjoy something else with it. Or if you are more active or you've got greater needs, it might be better for you to eat 3 of them, but they work well since they're small portions and you can kind of scale as needed. So in terms of leftovers, unfortunately, unlike most of the recipes we make on this program, I find that these don't hold up super, super well in the fridge. The tortillas are very thin, and with the beans on top of them, they can get a little mushy over time. So you're definitely safe to eat it over the course of, you know, up to 4 days, but the texture degrades very quickly. For that reason, and given how easy it is to make this, I'd recommend just making small batches to last you a day or two. Maybe just eating them right afterwards, enjoying them as a quick lunch or a dinner, or yeah, prepping maybe 1 or 2 days ahead. But you will notice some quality deterioration by that final day, whereas a lot of the other recipes we make don't really encounter that problem. But the recipe scales very well. I think the easiest thing to do would be to probably make a batch of 10, since you just use a full can, a full jalapeno, and then just some of the extra veggies. But that's really it for the recipe. Very quick, very simple, minimal skills required. I'm going to take a quick look at the chat here. See, we had a couple questions. So one was about the tortillas. Are they flour or corn? So I did mention those are corn tortillas, but you definitely have the option to substitute that out for like a flour tortilla if you prefer. Flour tortillas do tend to be higher in sodium, which was something I noted that we were trying to keep the sodium a little lower to make it heart healthy. So if you do use flour tortillas, definitely try to look for some lower sodium versions of the beans, or find other creative ways to add flavor without adding more sodium, because flour tortillas do tend to be higher in that. But check that nutrition label too. You can always look on the back of whatever package you have and compare the sodium content to other options and see what you find. Some other things we could add in here, similar to the recipe we made 2 weeks ago, I think corn would go really, really well on here. That's just a natural option for something like this where we're using kind of Mexican cuisine inspired flavors. But any veggies you want to mix in would work great. So we will be sending out a copy of the recording, a copy of the recipe with the nutrition information, as well as a link to a short survey where you can let us know what you thought of today's program. If you've got any suggestions, we always appreciate constructive criticism, and we're looking to make these programs better and better and more enjoyable for you. So keep an eye out for that email. We really appreciate that feedback. Additionally, we do demonstrations like this twice a month, and we do a wide variety of other programs too. We've got a guided meditation session tomorrow from 12 to 12:30 that I encourage you all to check out. And every Monday, if you're not already on our email list, we send out a weekly digest letting people know what programs we've got going on so you can make sure you never miss one of our offerings. If you'd like to be added to that mailing list, you can actually email me at rsmith250@gsu.edu, and we'll add you to that mailing list. And I'll put that email in the chat here in just a moment. And it seems like Cheryl mentioned I had another question, but I might have missed it. I see one that just popped up. This question is, do you also do low carb recipes? Can you give the grams of carbs for future recipes? Great question. So some of the recipes we make are low carbohydrate just by coincidence. It just kind of depends on what the ingredients are. But we always provide the nutrition information for every recipe we make. For these, one of the tostadas has 30 grams of carbohydrates in it. So that's coming from the tortilla, the refried beans, and the black beans primarily. So 30 carbs per tostada. So if you do that recommended serving, I said of 2, you're at about 60 grams of carbs for that meal. If you look at our past recipes, the nutrition information is always there, so you can check out that carbohydrate content. But all the recipes we make, if you're worried about carbohydrate counting, they are definitely going to be generally diabetic friendly, and they're going to be appropriate for most people's healthy diet needs because they'll have a high amount of fiber, lots of vegetables, whole grains, and we'll be watching those refined carbs or added sugars, things of that nature. So great question. And then I see, okay, this was another question that I missed earlier. And the question was about, should the seeds be removed from the jalapeno, I presume? So it's up to you. They are entirely edible. When I dice up a jalapeno, I just chop them up, throw them in, and I enjoy them. The spiciest part of the jalapeno comes from the white portion on the inside called the pith, and the seeds are all gathered around there. So some people will seed the jalapeno, but you definitely don't have to do it. They're edible, and I've never really been bothered by it, so I always just chop them up. If you want to take that extra step, you absolutely can, but it's not necessary. A lot of people will just dice the whole thing and throw it all in the mix. So good question. And then, okay, thank you, Cheryl. Cheryl just put my email in the chat there. So if you want to get on the mailing list to catch more programs like this, or just reach out to me for any reason, you can contact me at that email. We do have uploads of those previous cooking demonstrations, and we actually have a website where we log all of the previous recipes we've done. So if you're looking for low carb recipes or other healthy ideas, reach out to me. I'll be happy to provide that link and share those with you. So thank you everyone for attending today. I hope that you have a great rest of your day. Keep an eye out for that email with the recipe and that feedback survey, and we hope to see you at one of our programs soon. Thank you.